Nairobi, Kenya is hosting the Pan-African Conference on Human Rights here, with different civil society organizations across the continent converging in Africa, from Africa converging in Kenya's capital, for the shareholders to dialogue and create collaborations among key stakeholders in the continent to shape the human rights-oriented approach towards combating terrorism and violent extremism in the continent. And as this happened, Ibrahim Traore is warning ECOWAS in the Western Africa that all is not fair with them, that despite of the terrorism and violent extremism in the region, they have remained cagey and have not been playing pivotal role for protection of human rights. This is the voice of Raila Odinga back in Nairobi, and they're joining forces to tell the continent that it is time to wipe out those issues and factors that create instability in the continent. More of that you're going to receive in this podcast. Let's listen to Ibrahim Traore, Captain Ibrahim Traore, speaking and telling of the ECOWAS about the betrayal of the continent.
Remember that it was in 1975 that it was created, and it was created for the majority of state leaders, putschists, as they like to say. It was the military who took the power and took the responsibility to create ECOWAS so that there is a real economic growth of the people inside this space. Later, the so-called Democrats invited themselves to the heads of our states. They completely emptied the community of its foundation. When on July 26th, Niger decided to take its destiny into their own hands, we were surprised to see ECOWAS appear after some days with a force awaiting. Where was this force when thousands and thousands of Nigerians were killed by terrorists? Where was this force when thousands of Malians of Burkina Faso died under the bullets of terrorists? They said that by force they were going to evict the valiant sons of Niger who took the destiny into their own hands. Do you think that these are women who are in Niger? There are fighters there. The Nigerian army are warriors. They have been fighting for years. It is not a parade army or a peacekeeping army. And the armies of the ECOWAS have decided to unite. We are waiting for this force. These so-called Democrats must understand that when thousands of Nigerians die in hospital beds due to lack of electricity or lack of medication, it is a crime. They are responsible for these sanctions. They are responsible for these deaths. The same thing happens in Mali. With Burkina Faso, we have indirect sanctions. Because people must understand that when they take their orders from the other side, they come and do everything to apply it. It is shameful. Some have decided not to provide electricity to our countries. It is not free. We pay, and it contributes to their economy. They tried to make Mali suffer, and of course by ignoring all the texts and not giving electricity to Mali, hoping that the population would revolt. It didn't work. When it lasted, some were forced to make their own people pay by increasing the cost of electricity. It will increase again. This gives us several lessons. Several lessons in the sense that the independence we take, the sovereignty we take, we must do everything for it to be. They gave us very good lessons, and we understood them very well. Some closed their ports, which goes against all international texts, because you can't close a port in a landlocked country. They did it. They violated the texts. The international community didn't say a word. No one spoke in the ECOWAS. But in the ports, we don't let our goods pass for free. We pay. And those who do it collect the broken pots today. And I think it's a lesson for them too, that we must never apply the instructions of their masters. They must understand it forever. The ECOWAS never made a statement to congratulate a victory of our armies. The ECOWAS only condemns the end of the world, and very rarely when there are massacres. Where is this ECOWAS of peoples? In short, we can't mention all the harm that was done to our peoples, but we have decided with all our heart and conscience to withdraw and focus on our common organization, which is AES. Why are you afraid? Remember that there is no fear, because by prospecting and putting us to work, we have noticed one thing. Recently, some have decided to prohibit the export of certain food products to Burkina Faso. Very well. They have given a deadline. We will ensure that at the end of this deadline, we will prohibit the entry of these products into our territory. We are capable. We are capable, and we are very capable. We have had a lot of experience this year, and I can assure you that in terms of food, Burkina Faso can be self-sufficient, and we have brave peasants. We will put everything in place so that our peasants can work their land and cultivate it with dignity. And I challenge anyone who doubts this, that if we decide today in Burkina Faso to be the first exporter of cocoa in 3 or 5 years, we will be.
And that is the conversation that is going on. Raila Odinga made his maiden speech in Nairobi. He was the chief guest in that event, and clearly pointing out why there are some issues that Africa must address to ensure that human rights is protected. That never again that in the altar of fighting extremism, human rights should be violated. And different governments in Africa pledging that if he's going to be elected as the African Union chairperson, then will play the lead role in ensuring that human rights are protected across the continent.
As a continent, Africa is brimming with diversity, rich culture, and boundless potential. We want to add here that Africa is the richest continent on the planet Earth as far as the resources are concerned. It's a paradox. The richest is also the poorest when it comes to the living conditions of the people and also the issues of human rights. We are a continent that has weathered storms of adversity, emerged triumphant from the shackles of colonialism, and stood resilient in the face of daunting post-independent obstacles and challenges. Despite our resilience, we continue to grapple with the persistent threats of terrorism and the imperative of upholding human rights for all our citizens. Terrorism, in its many forms, seeks to destabilize our nations, undermine our democratic institutions, and sow seeds of fear and division among our people. It preys on the vulnerable, exploits the marginalized, and seeks to extinguish the flame of hope that burns within every African heart. But let us be clear. Terrorism shall find no sanctuary on our shores, and we shall not falter in our resolve to combat this scourge with every fiber of our being. However, in our unwavering pursuit of security and stability, we must never lose sight of the fundamental principles that define our humanity. Human rights are not negotiable. They are the cornerstone upon which our societies are built and the bedrock upon which our collective features rest. We cannot and must not sacrifice the rights and dignity of our people at the altar of security. Instead, we must strive for a balanced approach that ensures the safety of our citizens while upholding their inherent rights and freedoms. As I seek to become the chair of the African Union, given the opportunity, I pledge to lead with integrity, compassion, and a steadfast commitment to advancing the twin objectives of human rights and counterterrorism. I will work tirelessly to strengthen the capacity of our member states to combat terrorism through coordinated efforts, intelligence sharing, and targeted interventions. Simultaneously, I intend to champion initiatives that promote respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, foster inclusivity, and empower our citizens to become agents of positive change in their communities. The struggle for promoting human rights while countering terrorism is no mean task to be achieved by any one individual. It must be a collective effort. I call upon each and every one of you, representatives of civil society organizations from across the continent, to join hands with the UN, states, the AU, and all of us in this noble endeavor. Your voices are powerful catalysts for change. Your advocacy indispensable in shaping policies that reflect the aspirations and values of the African people. Together, let us forge a path towards a safer, more just, and prosperous Africa for all. In closing, let us draw inspiration from the resilience of our forebearers, the courage of those who have dared to dream, and the collective strength of our social diversity.
And I want us to look at this deeply. Let us answer the big question. What is causing violation of human rights in Africa? I know the leaders have spoken about terrorism and other violent extremism. But I want us to dive deep and look at more that what is causing the instability, why the guns are killing innocent children and women, that have been forced to move from their houses and search for alternative settlements. In those areas, their rights continue to be violated. That is duplication of the injustice. Number one is the leaders imposing themselves on power. I would want to use one of the most common examples that many of us would really want to relate with. One of the leaders that I really love most and associate with his ideals is the new youngest president in the continent. I'm speaking about the president of Senegal, Sonko. In Diomaye. In 2016, the Senegalese government changed the constitution that limited the Macky Sall's rule, could only rule for 2 5-year terms. And the constitution had outlawed any attempt for Macky Sall to remain in power post the 2 terms. But there were signs that he was getting up and warming up to get another term, with pundits saying that the reason why Macky Sall did not want to leave power is because there were some minerals that had been, that had been realized in Senegal, and had reached some deal with some foreign companies from France, and really that is why he wanted to perpetuate his power. And the fiery opposition leader, the young candidate from that place, the opposition candidate Sonko, was leading the protests in the streets of Senegal, calling for Macky Sall to leave power as stipulated in the constitution. This made him to brush shoulders with the government of Macky Sall, and so many trumped up charges were leveled against him. Remember, just to make sure that he's locked out of the vote, he was charged in absentia and jailed for 2 years. So technically the government managed to lock out Sonko from the race. But a gentleman and a friend he met way back while in prison, when they were jailed together, Diomaye Faye, emerged under his shadows, and it is believed that he supported the comrade Diomaye Faye to run for the presidency. And despite of coming in the shadow late in that race, he faced the other 19 candidates and the incumbent Macky Sall. Diomaye campaigned with Sonko saying that Diomaye is Sonko. And using the Sonko's shadow, Diomaye was able to floor and defeat Macky Sall, winning 54% and shocking the continent. But now look at that story. If Macky Sall would believe and really insist on remaining on power, the country was going down. Because the young population in Africa is gearing for change. The internet penetration in the continent and the advent of the social media has given a platform for the young people in the continent to voice their concerns and also put up their position in the political leadership. And that is why the young population cannot be witnessed. So if you look at that, it would have caused violence. And through that, the administration then met violence on the population. I want to bring you back in Kenya. In 2007, Raila Odinga faced off with incumbent Mwai Kibaki, who was on PNU, and Raila Odinga was on ODM. It is really different publications in the continent, in the country, showed that Raila Odinga won that vote by a landslide. But the oligarchs around the late President Mwai Kibaki did not allow for transition to happen, and figures had to be cooked, and the president was sworn in late in the night against the will of the constitution. The country broke into violence, and the security forces went berserk and killed children and women, dragging from the houses. And just from that, more than 100,000 people, more than millions of Kenyans were displaced and are still even in the camps, while some families still have scars. Why did it happen? It turned very ugly because the will of the population was actually submerged in the vote. So you can see that an attempt by the late President Mwai Kibaki to remain in power caused an instability in the country, and things really turned very ugly. That was the downest moment of Kenya 10 years, more than 15 years ago. I think more than 18 years ago. So these are the things that we are saying, that the continent must be alive to the fact that they must allow for peaceful transitions, just like former President Uhuru Kenyatta also allowed for peaceful transition, as the constitution really dictates. The constitutionalism of the continent is what will help it to be more stable, so that when your time to leave comes, you leave and kiss goodbye. The second other cause of causing violation of human rights, apart from, and remember, at this leaders imposing, causing instability, the incumbent do use the security forces to hurt and violate people's rights. And that is what has been causing that. The violent extremism largely is thriving on unemployment and underdevelopment in the continent. A very good research and reports from the continent will tell you that the violent groups that are coming in the continent have huge amounts of money. And this money is the trap that is used to employ the innocent young children in the continent as members of these violent groups, and they're the ones that are being used to execute such. So, but why do they go there? You find out an opportunity like in the Kenyan coast, the Kenyan coastal region where this really thrived, there is underemployment, the drug abuse, and there is no food for them. So when they find an opportunity even to join these violent extremism groups, they don't blink and they can't think twice because they're looking for quick fortune. This has largely to be blamed on the governance of countries. And when they join, they come back and they're used as the spy to provide intelligence on what's happening in the country. And they used underemployment because some people also in the security system can also be used to abet and support this extremism. These people come and kill. Remember in 2013 there was terrorism where people lost lives in Westgate, and I think a year later or so, I think back in 2015 there was also another one in Garissa University in Kenya. Largely all these are abetted by people that know the terrain. The brain drain is one of the issues. Recently there was a coup d'etat in DRC Congo. And in the DRC Congo, those who were arrested around the coup were those linked to the the US military. They received training in the US military. So people say that lest they leave the continent, and remember, 9 out of 10 youths in Africa are looking for the opportunities abroad. And if they go abroad and they find opportunities where they can't be recruited, they get recruited in these extremism groups, and that is how they come back and betray the continent. So the continent must fix its unemployment so that the youth in the continent find safer grounds here. Number 3 is uncontrolled military influence here. And I want to use an example of 2 countries, especially Libya, DR Congo, and more importantly, the Sahel nations. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are all identical in one thing. After destroying power through military, they are kicking out the foreign military bases in those regions. I've also seen the MI5 also saying the French military must leave the French nation, must leave Senegal. Why? Because they believe they're the ones that are coming to fleece the continent of resources. Those countries remain poor and their population cannot even be able to get basic need. And the government cannot work for the people. That is outright human rights violation because children are going hungry. Even in countries where resources can be used to feed the nation. The oil in the continent, the companies that drill the oil, drill it and run with it, take it to Europe and come sell it back here. While some countries here, they don't even have electricity. They cannot even be able to move their machines. So that is economic emancipation of the continent. That economic drainage of the continent is already an outright violation of human rights because people cannot even be able to get right to education because they can't build schools, the right to good health because they can't build hospitals, and the countries that have resources are endowed the countries that are endowed with resources are staring at imminent instability every second. Lastly, and this is very important, the civil wars in the continent is the greatest impediment to development here. Look at the civil wars in South Sudan. Sudan split. Look at Ethiopia. Look at Somalia. Look at DR Congo. The genocide in Burundi. And you can name them. Do you know in the country Kenya, we have some of the largest refugee camps in the world, Dadaab and Kakuma camp. Kakuma refugee camp in the northwestern part of Kenya is the largest refugee camp in the world, established in 1992, and the camp is jointly managed by the Kenyan Department of Refugee Affairs and UNHCR. Today, Kakuma is home to over 100,000 South Sudanese and 55,000 Somali refugees, most of whom were driven from their home countries by civil war, but the camp also hosts refugees from other countries. Despite of them being in the camps, these areas lack social services and basic services such as water, the hospitals. Education is disrupted, and it is very difficult. The communities that are living in these areas are deprived of even rights, such other rights of even rights of moving out of those areas. So there is a big problem in this. Look at the Mishamo refugee camp settlement in the northern Tanzania, not far from the shores of Lake Tanganyika, and the once 10th refugee camp. Mishamo was unofficially established in 1970s by Burundian refugees fleeing the first Burundian genocide in their country. Here, you can see IMF, not IMF, World Bank is supposed to advance a facility to the country. They're saying one of the conditions is Kenyan government must use that money to feed those refugees. Why? That is already fleecing the economy of the country. These camps also emerge as the breeding sites for extremism groups. Multiple reports have been showing that Al-Shabaab that have been wreaking havoc in the country, most and some of them go and hide in those camps because of the humanitarian aid that is waning out, the humanitarian aid that is waning there, they cannot provide. And remember, the global order is not even for them to close. Kenya tried to close some of these refugee camps so that they can go back to their country, and that was declined because people see them as their cash cows. There are NGOs thriving in those areas, masquerading as finding solutions, but they must make sure the problems persist because the right statements to get money from donors. Ladies and gentlemen, Africa must rethink its position because without this, human rights violation is not going to end today.